Have you ever wondered why some children seem to understand things that adults have forgotten? Why certain kids stare at the stars longer than others? Ask questions that make grown-ups uncomfortable, or find magic in the ordinary moments that most people rush past. Alan Watts once said, "We are not born into this world, we are born out of it, like a wave from the ocean." What if I told you that some of the strangest, most isolating experiences you had as a child weren't signs that something was wrong with you, but rather proof that you were more awake than those around you? Today, we're diving deep into 5 unmistakable signs from your childhood that reveal you've always been an awakened soul. And if you recognize even one of these signs in yourself, stay until the end, because there's something profound waiting for you. Let's begin. The first sign is perhaps the most painful one to carry as a child. That deep, unexplainable feeling that you didn't quite belong in this world. Not in a dramatic way, not because you were different or weird, but in a quiet, persistent way that you couldn't put into words. You'd look around at other children playing, laughing, completely absorbed in their games. And even when you joined them, even when you were smiling, there was this whisper inside you that said, "I'm here, but I'm not really here." Alan Watts described this beautifully when he said, "The feeling of being an outsider is often a sign that you are seeing through the game that everyone else is playing unconsciously." You see, most children are born into complete identification with the physical world. They believe the game is real. They believe the rules are absolute. They believe the stories their parents tell them about who they should be, what they should want, and how life works. But you sensed something else. Maybe you'd lie in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering, who am I really? What is all this? Why does everyone act like this is normal? These weren't intellectual questions. They came from somewhere deeper, from a part of you that remembered something that existed before the conditioning, before the labels, before you learned to play the game. Your parents might have worried. Teachers might have said you were too quiet or in your own world. Other kids might not have understood why you sometimes seemed distant. But the truth is, you weren't distant. You were present in a way that most people never learn to be. You were sensing the dreamlike quality of existence while others were lost in the dream itself. Watts often talked about the cosmic joke, the idea that we are the universe experiencing itself, pretending to be separate individuals. As a child, you hadn't fully bought into that pretense yet. You still remembered, even dimly, that you were more than just this body, this name, this story. Think back to those moments of inexplicable homesickness. Not for a place you could name, but for something you couldn't quite remember. That wasn't depression or sadness. That was your soul recognizing that it temporarily left its true home to play in this physical dimension. And here's the beautiful paradox that Watts would want you to understand. The very feeling of not belonging is what proves you're exactly where you need to be. You came here to wake up. You came here to remember what everyone else has forgotten. You came here to be a reminder that there's more to life than the surface game. So if you spent your childhood feeling like an alien in a strange world, congratulations, that wasn't a flaw. That was your awakened soul, refusing to fall completely asleep. The second sign that you were an awakened soul from childhood, you asked questions that made adults uncomfortable. Not, "Why is the sky blue?" or "Where do babies come from?" but questions like, "What happens to my thoughts when I die? How do I know I'm not dreaming right now? If God made everything, who made God? Why do we have to do things we don't want to do? What was I before I was born?" Remember the look on their faces? That momentary panic in their eyes? The way they'd awkwardly change the subject or give you a simplified answer that didn't actually answer anything. Alan Watts wrote, "The moment we stop asking these fundamental questions is the moment we fall asleep to our true nature." Most children ask why a few times, get unsatisfying answers, and eventually stop asking. They learn to accept the world as it's presented to them. They learn that certain questions are inappropriate, or too deep, or not for children. But you couldn't stop. These questions burned inside you, because here's what was really happening. Your soul was trying to prevent itself from being hypnotized by consensus reality. Every culture, every society, every family has a shared trance, a collective agreement about what's real, what matters, what we should pursue, and what we should ignore. This trance is taught through repetition, reward, and punishment, until most people can't even see it anymore. They believe their thoughts without questioning them. They follow paths because that's what you're supposed to do. They chase goals they never consciously chose. They live entire lives on autopilot. But your questions were interruptions to that programming. They were your consciousness refusing to be formatted. When you asked, "Who am I really?" you weren't looking for your name or your family role. You were asking the most profound question in all of philosophy, the question that Zen masters meditate on for decades. When you asked, "What happens when I die?" you weren't just curious about an event in the future. You were confronting the mystery of existence itself, trying to understand the nature of consciousness. When you asked, "Why do I have to do things I don't want to do?" you weren't being rebellious. You were questioning the fundamental assumption that we should override our authentic impulses to fit into society's mold. What's often said, the only real philosophical question is whether to commit suicide or have a cup of coffee. He wasn't being morbid. He was pointing to the fact that existence itself is the ultimate mystery. And most people avoid this mystery by staying busy with trivial pursuits. But you couldn't avoid it. Even as a child, you felt the weight of existence. You sensed that something profound was happening beneath the surface of ordinary life. Maybe you'd stare at your hand and think, "This is my hand, but what is this me that owns it? Where does it come from?" Maybe you'd feel the weirdness of language, how we use sounds and symbols to represent reality. And you'd wonder, is the word the thing itself, or are we all just agreeing to pretend? Maybe you'd watch adults follow rules and rituals and wonder, do they really believe in this? Or are they just doing it because everyone else is? These weren't random thoughts. These were the questions of a philosopher, a mystic, a seeker, all housed in a child's body. And here's what's crucial to understand. The fact that adults couldn't answer your questions wasn't because you asked bad questions. It was because you asked real questions. Questions that reveal the limits of conventional knowledge. Questions that point beyond concepts into direct experience. Watts would tell you, the person who thinks they have the answers has stopped growing. The person who lives in the questions is dancing with life itself. So if you were that kid who couldn't stop asking why, if you drove your parents crazy with your philosophical interrogations, if you sensed early on that the emperor has no clothes and everyone was pretending not to notice, then you weren't a difficult child. You were a conscious child, an awakened soul trying not to forget itself in the midst of the forgetting that surrounds us all. And those questions you asked, they're still inside you. They never left. They're just waiting for you to start listening again. The third sign, you experienced moments of profound unity with nature that went beyond typical childhood wonder. This is different from simply liking nature or enjoying being outside. What I'm talking about are those transcendent moments where the boundary between you and everything else seemed to dissolve. Maybe you were lying in grass, watching clouds drift by, and suddenly you weren't watching anymore. You were the clouds. You were the sky. You were the grass beneath you. There was no separation. Or perhaps you were near water, a stream, an ocean, a lake, and you felt yourself merge with the rhythm of the waves, your breathing synchronized with the tide. Your consciousness expanded beyond your small body. Or you were in a forest, and instead of walking through the trees, you felt yourself as part of the forest itself. the same life force flowing through the roots flowing through you. Alan Watts spent much of his life trying to help people rediscover this experience. He said, "You didn't come into this world, you came out of it, like a wave from the ocean. You are not a stranger here." Most adults have completely lost this sense of connection. They see nature as something separate from themselves, something to visit on weekends, something to conquer, something to photograph for social media. But as a child, you knew better. You hadn't yet been fully convinced that you were just a separate self, isolated inside a bag of skin, fundamentally alone in the universe. I want you to remember a specific moment. Go back in your memory to a time when you were young and felt this connection. Maybe it was watching an ant carry a crumb and suddenly feeling the epic nature of its journey. Understanding without words that from the ant's perspective, this was an entire world of meaning and purpose. Maybe it was holding a flower and sensing its aliveness, its participation in the same cosmic dance you were part of. Maybe it was at night, looking up at stars, and instead of feeling small and insignificant, you felt expanded, like your consciousness could stretch out and touch those distant lights, like you were the universe looking at itself. These weren't childish fantasies or overactive imagination. These were moments of authentic perception. You see, Watts taught that our normal way of seeing the world is actually the hallucination. We've been taught to see ourselves as separate observers in a dead universe of objects. We've been taught to believe that consciousness is trapped inside our skulls, looking out at an external reality. But quantum physics, ancient mysticism, and direct experience all point to something else. We are not separate observers. We are the universe observing itself through billions of temporary focal points. When you felt that oneness with nature as a child, you weren't imagining something. You were remembering something. You were experiencing reality as it actually is, before the conceptual mind divides everything into subject and object, self and other, me and not me. Watts used to tell a story about watching his daughter in the garden. She was about 3 years old, completely absorbed in watching a ladybug crawl across a leaf. For 20 minutes she didn't move. She wasn't bored. She wasn't waiting for something to happen. She was completely present, completely fascinated by the simple miracle of existence. That's the consciousness of an awakened soul, not striving to get somewhere or be someone different, just fully here, fully now, fully alive to the mystery of what is. But here's what happens. As we grow older, we're taught to disconnect. We're told that treating nature as alive is animism, primitive, childish. We're taught that consciousness belongs only to humans, maybe to animals, but certainly not to trees, rivers, mountains, or stars. We're taught to see the world as a collection of resources rather than a web of relationships. We're taught to value doing over being, achieving over experiencing, capturing over surrendering. And slowly that direct perception fades. Those moments of unity become rarer. We forget what we once knew, but awakened souls never forget completely. Even if it's been years since you felt that connection, even if life has piled layer upon layer of conditioning on top of it, it's still there. That's why certain moments in nature can still bring you to tears. That's why a sunset can stop you in your tracks. That's why sitting by water can calm something deep in your soul that nothing else can touch. You're not being sentimental. You're not being romantic. You're recognizing yourself in everything you see. You're remembering that you are not in nature. You are nature. Alan Watts would say, "You are an aperture through which the universe is looking at and exploring itself." If you had moments as a child where you felt this truth, where you experienced the interconnectedness of all things, where the boundary between self and world became transparent, then you weren't daydreaming. You were awake in a world of sleepwalkers. You were seeing clearly in a culture of collective blindness, and that capacity hasn't left you. It's just waiting for you to come back home. The fourth sign that you've been an awakened soul since childhood. You were painfully, overwhelmingly sensitive to the emotions and energy of those around you. Not just empathetic in the normal sense. We're talking about something deeper. You'd walk into a room and immediately know the emotional atmosphere. You could feel tension between your parents before any words were spoken. You could sense when someone was lying, not because of what they said, but because their energy didn't match their words. You'd pick up on subtle shifts in mood that others seemed blind to. A slight change in someone's tone would hit you like a wave. You absorbed the emotions of those around you like a sponge, often without realizing it. Teachers would get frustrated with you for being too sensitive. Other kids might have called you weird for caring so much about things they didn't even notice. Your parents might have told you to toughen up or not take things so personally. But here's the truth that Alan Watts understood deeply. Your sensitivity wasn't a weakness. It was a higher form of perception. Watts taught that separation is an illusion. The boundaries we draw between me and you, between self and other, these are conceptual constructs, not actual barriers. At the deepest level, we are all expressions of the same unified consciousness. We are like waves on the same ocean, appearing separate but fundamentally connected. Most people have learned to shut down this natural awareness of interconnection. They've built thick walls around themselves to feel safe, to maintain the illusion of being isolated individuals. But your walls were thinner, or perhaps you never built them properly to begin with. This meant you could feel what others were feeling, not through logical deduction or observational skill, but through resonance. Your consciousness was still fluid enough to merge partially with the consciousness of those around you. Think about specific moments from your childhood. Maybe you couldn't enjoy a birthday party because you could sense your mother's hidden sadness. While other kids were absorbed in games and cake, you were tuned into emotional frequencies they couldn't detect. Maybe you felt physically ill when there was conflict in your home, even if no one was yelling. The discordant energy made your body react. Maybe you had a teacher who smiled at everyone, but you felt the anger beneath the surface. You were picking up on the incongruence between their mask and their inner state. Maybe you befriended the loneliest kid in class, not because you were told to or because you wanted to be nice, but because you could feel their isolation so intensely it hurt your own heart. Alan Watts would say you were experiencing what Buddhists call karuna, compassion that arises, not from moral obligation, but from the direct recognition that others' suffering is not separate from your own. You weren't being too sensitive. You were experiencing reality more accurately than those who had learned to numb themselves. But let's be honest, this was not easy. This is probably still not easy for you. Being this sensitive as a child meant you carried burdens that weren't yours. You tried to fix your parents' marriage. You absorbed your siblings' pain. You felt responsible for others' happiness in ways that no child should. You might have learned to people please, to constantly scan the environment for signs of disapproval or danger. You might have lost touch with your own feelings because you were so overwhelmed by everyone else's. You might have been labeled as difficult, dramatic, or attention-seeking when really you were drowning in emotional information that you had no tools to process. And here's something crucial that Watts would want you to understand. The problem wasn't your sensitivity. The problem was that you were a highly sensitive being growing up in an emotionally unconscious environment. You were like a person with exceptional hearing living in a world where everyone is shouting. The solution isn't to damage your hearing. It's to find environments and people who understand the value of speaking softly. Your sensitivity was trying to teach you something profound, that the boundaries we think exist between people are far more permeable than we've been told. That consciousness is shared, not isolated. That we affect each other in ways that go far beyond words and actions. Watts often spoke about the wisdom of insecurity, the idea that trying to isolate and protect ourselves from life actually causes more suffering than opening to the flow of existence, your sensitivity. As a child was already demonstrating this wisdom. You couldn't shut down and separate yourself from others. You were forced to recognize your interconnection, to feel the web of relationships that holds us all. Now, as an adult, your challenge isn't to toughen up or build walls or become less sensitive. Your challenge is to learn discernment, to recognize what emotions are yours and what belongs to others. To develop practices that help you process the emotional information you're constantly receiving. To find communities of other sensitive souls who understand this way of being. Because here's the gift hidden in your sensitivity. You have the capacity for deep empathy, for genuine connection, for understanding human nature in ways that less sensitive people simply cannot access. You can sense what's happening beneath the surface. You can feel the currents of emotion that shape relationships, families, communities, and cultures. You have natural abilities as a healer, counselor, artist, or any role that requires deep understanding of the human heart. So if you spent your childhood absorbing everyone's emotions, if you were the family therapist at age 7, if you cried easily and felt deeply and couldn't understand why everyone else seemed so comfortable with surface-level connection, then you weren't defective. You were awake to dimensions of reality that others had learned to tune out, Alan Watts would tell you. You are the universe experiencing itself subjectively. Your sensitivity is evidence that you never fully forgot this truth. You remained porous to the shared consciousness that flows through all of us. And that, my friend, is the mark of an awakened soul. The fifth and final sign, you experienced frequent vivid dreams, strong déjà vu, and moments of intuitive knowing that seemed to come from nowhere. This is where your experience as a child might have crossed into territory that felt genuinely strange or even frightening. Maybe you had dreams that felt more real than waking life, dreams where you visited places that seemed familiar even though you'd never been there, dreams that contained information you couldn't have known, dreams where you met beings or versions of yourself that felt significant beyond explanation. Maybe you experienced déjà vu so intense it stopped you in your tracks. Not the mild, I've been here before feeling that everyone gets occasionally, but the overwhelming sense that you'd already lived this exact moment, knew what was coming next, and couldn't quite remember how you knew. Maybe you just knew things without being told. You knew the phone was about to ring before it did. You knew something had happened to someone you loved before anyone told you. You knew which choice to make even when logic pointed elsewhere. Alan Watts taught that our ordinary waking consciousness, the rational, language-based, time-bound awareness, is just one small island in a vast ocean of consciousness. He said, "We are living in a culture entirely hypnotized by the illusion of time, in which the so-called present moment is felt as nothing but an infinitesimal hairline between an all-powerfully causative past and an absorbingly important future. But as a child, you weren't fully hypnotized yet. You still had access to other ways of knowing. Your vivid dreams weren't random neural firing. They were glimpses into other dimensions of your consciousness, the parts of you that exist beyond physical time and space. Your déjà vu wasn't a glitch in the brain. It was a moment when linear time became transparent, revealing the eternal now that Watts spoke about constantly, the recognition that past, present, and future are human constructs laid over a reality that simply is. Your intuitive knowing wasn't lucky guessing. It was your awakened consciousness accessing information through channels that science hasn't fully mapped yet. The interconnected web of awareness that links all beings, all moments, all possibilities. You see, awakened souls are not bound by consensus reality in the same way. They remember, even if dimly, that consciousness is primary and physical reality is secondary. That time is flexible. That information flows through channels beyond the five senses. That reality is far stranger and more magical than we've been taught. Most children have these experiences occasionally, but for you, they were frequent, intense, undeniable. You couldn't dismiss them. You couldn't explain them away, and probably you learned not to talk about them. Because when you did, people looked at you strangely. They rationalized your experiences. They told you it was just your imagination or just a coincidence, but you knew better. You knew there was something more happening. If you recognized yourself in even one of these signs, if memories from childhood have been flooding back as you've been listening, then welcome home. You've always been an awakened soul, trying to navigate a world that doesn't quite understand you. Trying to remain conscious in a culture designed to put you to sleep. Alan Watts spent his life reminding people of what you already sensed as a child, that you are not a separate self, isolated and alone, that you are the universe experiencing itself, that the present moment is all there ever is, that death is not the end but a transformation, that life is not a problem to be solved but a mystery to be lived. You didn't come here by accident. Your sensitivity, your questions, your moments of unity, your intuitive gifts, these weren't burdens. They were equipment. The world needs awakened souls more than ever. People who remember what everyone else has forgotten. People who can see through the game while still playing it with compassion. People who can hold space for mystery in a culture addicted to certainty. So don't try to fix yourself. Don't try to become normal. Don't try to shut down the very gifts that prove your consciousness is awake. Instead, honor what you've always known. Return to those childhood perceptions, but this time with the wisdom and tools to integrate them. Find others who understand, and live your truth even when the world doesn't understand it. Because as Alan Watts would say, the meaning of life is just to be alive. It is so plain and so obvious and so simple. And yet everybody rushes around in a great panic, as if it were necessary to achieve something beyond themselves. You already are what everyone else is searching for. You always have been.